Well, first of all, I just wanted to introduce myself. I've been councillor for Farrance Ward since May 2019. And I just wanted to point out that I'm obviously very impressed by the calibre and obviously experience of everybody here. And I just wanted to point out that even in the council, I'm not on planning, and it isn't an area that I'm particularly familiar with. I've had a lifetime career in public service, in health and education. So first of all, my submission really is representing my residents. And I grew up in Margate and I returned 25 years ago to raise my children. So I do have a lot in common with my residents and their considerable concerns about our home. So I'm hoping that I can bring that to this meeting. I realise that lots of people here today don't have much knowledge about Thanet and its uniqueness, and I can totally appreciate that. We have two particular areas, I think, that make us fairly unique. One is sadly that we are, as has been mentioned, a very deprived area, and later on I'll give you some stats on that. But we also have, of course, our wonderful coastline, our rolling fields and our open skies. And the local plan encapsulates that by saying that the undulating chalk farmland is a particular landscape feature in Thanet. The openness and undeveloped character of the high-quality farmland contributes to the essentially rural character and relatively dark skies. And this is quite key to the concerns of residents. But we've also got to be aware of the fact that Thanet is actually the most built-up area in Kent already, except for fringes around London. And I did send in a map that does illustrate that. It's quite clear that Thanet is a relatively very built-up area already. And I think this is helpful in putting local people's fears into context and why we are so desperately concerned about the possibility of an even more built-up Thanet of the future and the spectre of having none of our precious open spaces left. From the point of view of deprivation and affordable housing and viability, the fact that this is an area with high levels of deprivation and low wages means, of course, that the demand for affordable housing is very high. I understand that the low offer of affordable housing from Gladman is due to the fact that the development would be difficult and expensive because it's on a hillside and it has an area of potential flooding in the middle. And that Gladman is aiming for a profit of around 20% on the development. And I'd like to suggest that Gladman could at any time have considered making a slightly smaller profit and giving Margate the housing it most desperately needs. It's also worth noting that other developments in Thanet offer 30% affordable housing. One even has 100% affordable housing. That's a new development that's just been recently started. And those developers work extensively with TDC Biodiversity and Horticultural Officer and are ensuring a retention of the expansion of woodland, a large pond, and many other wildlife initiatives that are actually obviously too many to list here. Further, I think it goes without saying that in an area of high deprivation and poor health, issues which affect the well-being of residents become even more important. So we need to ensure that the landscape of our beloved island isn't changed significantly or detrimentally. In fact, the open space strategy of 2017 highlights one of the key issues facing the health of Thanet, in that 68% of residents are classed as having weight issues. This is in the local plan, page 147. The local plan of 2020 also gives some excellent guidance, and I have been asked by residents to emphasise just a few of these to you today. And these are quotes from the local plan. Thanet forms a discrete and distinct area characterised by its unity of land use arising from high quality fertile soils. Open with few trees, the area is dominated by wide views over an extensive land cover of cereals, root crops and other horticultural crops. Future development should seek to protect and enhance the assets, which provide a strong sense of place. The undulating chalk farmland is a particular landscape feature in Thanet. The openness and undeveloped character of the high-quality farmland contributes to the essentially rural character and relatively dark skies. Indeed, the local plan also says development proposals should demonstrate how their location, scale, design, and materials will conserve and enhance Thanet's local distinctiveness, in particular, a sense of openness and big skies, particularly in the central part of the district. Gaps between Thanet's towns and villages and subtle skylines and ridges which are prominent from lower lying landscape. This distinction between town and countryside should be retained, but unfortunately it seems that these proposed developments seeks to do the opposite of those aims of the local plan. I also note that Gladman have stated that the landscape of the site, and I quote, is not of any notable heritage interest and is of negligible significance in EIA terms, that's I suppose environmental terms, and is not a heritage asset. We strongly contest this view. It has, of course, a long and vital heritage, but I'll leave it there because I know that other people are giving explanatory evidence to challenge or have given explanatory evidence to challenge that statement. The area that I would particularly like to focus on, because no one else apart from Westgate and Garnish Group have mentioned this, but is GP services. I am obviously aware that officially this is not TDC's responsibility, and the requirement is for Kent and Medway CCG to state a required sum of money for new buildings or extensions to existing surgeries. However, when I talk to residents, and residents talk to me about the proposed development, they always voice their fears about more lives being put at risk when we all know that our services are so stretched already. Therefore, we feel it's clear that we cannot consider any new homes until this overriding problem of GP services is addressed. And I'll explain why this is particularly important with statistics to go with it. As we mentioned, Margate is an area of extreme deprivation. It's actually the 67th most deprived area out of over 32,000 in England and Wales. Okay, the 67th most deprived out of over 32,000 areas. And the second out of 902 most deprived area in Kent. Currently, GP provision in Thanet is woefully inadequate, but in particular, the Lyme surgery in central Margate has approximately 6,000 patients per GP, whereas the national average is about 2,000. And it's this Lyme surgery that would accommodate all these new residents, which is a total of approximately 1,680 new residents, which includes the 250 houses already designated for Sandston Ward. In October 2020, the Kent and Medway CCG wrote to TDC Planning Department to justify a developer's contribution of £388,000 towards new buildings and extensions to GP surgeries to accommodate additional residents. The report from the CCG made no mention of the increased number of doctors, nurses, and other professional staff which would be required to run this service. So this is October 2020. Now, in April 2021, the CCG publicly declared that there was a problem with the GP service in Thanet, revealing that Thanet continues to struggle with a low number of doctors and pledged to offer more support to a fragile GP system. It's important to note this public declaration was made 6 months after the CCG made their formal report to TDC. This report did not acknowledge there was any difficulty in providing GP and other professional health services to the residents of Margate, either at that time or with the addition of up to 2,000 new residents. Clearly, the CCG should be asked to produce a revised, up-to-date report on the state of GP services in Margate. And a bit more background, as evidenced by the following facts from 2018 to 19, there have been significant problems in Thanet for many years. In their 2017-18 annual report, the CCG noted primary care infrastructure across Thanet could be destabilised to a critical point due to multiple GP and practice nurse vacancies. In January 2019, the Royal College of GPs compared population data with GP workforce numbers from NHS Digital and found that Thanet has one of the worst GP to patient ratios in the country, and this was in January 2019. In August 2019, the chair of the NHS Thanet Clinical Commissioning Group stated that GP practices were unable to sustain themselves financially with closures on the Isle, meaning surgeries had dropped from 17 to 13 in just 18 months. He said, many of them have not been able to get the right staff and they've not been able to get locums. This is why we have to look very carefully at how we deliver things. Many GPs are burning out or are over a certain age. Demand on practices is phenomenal. So GP shortages and an ageing population contribute to tough working conditions for doctors. The Isle has the country's second highest number of patients over 75 years old per full employed GP, as well as the fifth highest overall number of patients. This combination of high overall numbers of patients per GP and high numbers of patients aged over 75 suggests that doctors working in primary care in these areas face some of the toughest working environments in the country. In October 2019, the managing director of East Kent Clinical Commissioning Group said, the recruitment of GPs remains a significant challenge nationally and for Thanet's GP practices. In addition, a letter from Newington Road Surgery in Ramsgate stated that the decision to manage list is due to the difficult situation we find ourselves in, adding that we came to this conclusion based on clinical safety reasons. We currently have nearly 8,000 patients and just 2 GPs. The national average at that time was 1,800 patients per GP. We've been advertising for a new GP to join our team since August 2015 without success. And the combination of high overall numbers, I've already said, patients per GP and high numbers of the older people make these very tough working conditions. So along with others, for the last 3 years, I've been actively campaigning and lobbying the CCG to encourage them to offer incentives for GPs to work in Thanet and particularly Margate. But the CCG has steadfastly refused to consider offering incentives for Thanet, such as enhanced payments or golden handshakes. It's therefore clear that this is not acceptable. And it seems clear that TDC perhaps and the CCG have no alternative but to urgently ensure that our GP services are improved before the number of residents increases so dramatically. On behalf of my residents, I hope that any developer would also take the situation seriously and take appropriate action with the relevant bodies to safeguard the health of people in Margate and Thanet. So I just want to mention a couple of other factors that my residents have asked me to raise, but I realise have been covered by others, so I will be brief. Residents consistently raise the lack of consideration of the serious flooding in the area. And I think the important thing to emphasise, information you've had already, this is local knowledge. As locals, we all know that Shottendane Road becomes a river when there's heavy rain. We obviously have physio evidence and there's much other evidence. As locals, we're also well aware of raw sewage being pumped into our coastal waters, resulting in closure of our beaches for prolonged periods, particularly this recent summer. This not only affects the well-being of residents, but it takes a considerable toll on our many businesses which depend on visitors for survival. The raw sewage is pumped out when rainfall is high, and this has not become an unusual occurrence. Therefore, building on our fields and thus preventing natural soakaways can only exacerbate an already unacceptable situation. I'm also aware that KCC has made some contributions about this, but I'm also aware, but from their own correspondence, that they aren't aware of all the relevant information and the history of flooding, the particular history of flooding in this Margate area. So there are extra concerns which I'm sure are being addressed by others who are submitting information for you to this inquiry. I also submitted a map that shows about global warming. It shows how the sea could come right up to Tivoli Brook by 2050. That's a very low-lying area, that coastal area by Dreamland, by Margate Station, and where we've been talking about the outflow from the Tivoli Brook coming out onto Margate Sands. That very low-lying area, according to the map, could easily be underwater right up to Tivoli Brooks. Residents have continually expressed alarm about the building on the fields for these reasons, but I wondered if anyone had actually looked at the double whammy of sea level rising with the potential to swamp the Tivoli Brook from both sides, as has been discussed earlier today. A final locals concern is about transport. This proposed development is clearly car reliant. As has been mentioned, the nearest bus stop and railway station are not really within close walking distance. There's also a concern about where people would get their local shopping. There's no provision for that either. I just wanted to end with a couple of national points. There's been a lack of any thought to the fact that this is established an ancient prime agricultural land, and the country is on its way to a state of food insecurity. We import 48% of our total food consumed, and the proportion is rising. We rely on imports and a thriving agricultural sector to feed ourselves and drive economic growth. And it just is a source of great confusion to locals as to why we would build on prime agricultural land. In addition, only last week, the government unveiled the next stages of its plan to reward farmers and landowners for actions which benefit the environment, supporting sustainable food production alongside vital nature recovery and work towards net zero. So we seem to be going against lots of aspects there as well. So in conclusion, as I've said, nationally, we have to think about food insecurity and government guidelines, government actions that have just happened about that, sea level rising, rainfall increasing. And that's having a particular effect, obviously, in this area around Tivoli Brook. And locally, there's a unique landscape of Thanet. It's already overdeveloped compared to the rest of Kent, and we do feel that our unique landscape needs to be retained and respected. The flooding and the raw sewage discharges are major concerns now and need to be addressed. And of course, the GP situation is dire, has been for some years, and there is a real genuine fear amongst residents. If we have more residents in the area, what will happen? It's already at breaking point. And just finally, there was a comment about, obviously, officially, Mr. Williams was talking about the harm caused by development as outweighed by benefits. And about some comments from the planning committee being will-o'-the-wisp. What I'd really like to point out is that the planning committee is made up of councillors who are democratically elected and represent their residents. And I think this is the important thing here. We're talking about local knowledge and local people who feel quite passionately about this for very objective reasons. This is not an emotional situation. I think we've outlined between us some pretty clear, logical, serious and objective reasons to be concerned. And I do hope that that will be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farrance, for those comments again. That's very helpful. Thank you. Just one or two questions from me, if that is okay. In terms of the situation with the GP shortage that you talked about at some length, and I think you've made written submissions on this already, I will ask that the appellant does address those in their planning evidence later on as well, because I don't think that's something that's been addressed in a particular position paper so far. Are you, because obviously there is a contribution being negotiated with Kent County Council, not Kent County Council, as part of the actual Section 106. It's not with Kent County Council, is it? Which provides a contribution towards health facilities. Have you got issue with that? That doesn't is your argument that doesn't do sufficiently because GPs can't be the difficulty in GPs being employed in this area?
Yeah, I mean, you can have all the buildings in the world, but if you can't find people, if you can't recruit GPs and also other health staff, it's actually pointless. And we are in a dire situation already.
And what do you think that is your request to the developer that somehow they address that, or because obviously the local plan is there to sort of, address such things through strategic provision, etc. What from your point of view could the developer do to address that, or are you simply saying there shouldn't be new houses because until this actually has been addressed?
Well, I don't think and residents don't think we should be building new houses until it's addressed. But it just isn't being addressed. And the situation, as I quoted from 2018-19, was bad. It's just got worse and worse, and lives are clearly at risk. So I don't mind who it is, but which body it is, and I hoped it would be the CCG, and I have been in contact with them over the years about it, would be offering some sort of scheme or incentives to encourage more GPs and health professionals to work in Thanet. But they just say it's impossible. They do refer to some national schemes, but I do think that given our unique situation in Thanet, that some more consideration needs to be given. I mean, some really deep thought needs to be given as to how anyone, the CCG, TDC, KCC, or the developers, wants to contribute to that or help to alleviate this really dire situation. 6,000 patients per GP is just not acceptable. I don't know anywhere else in the country has that number. Maybe they do, but.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you. I understand. And you also talked a little bit about the local plan. Obviously, this is a site that's been allocated in the local plan, and that there are some things where it's been allocated for a specific number of dwellings in the local plan. And that's quite a recent allocation. And there are some things which obviously are sort of site-specific things where you could sort of talk about buildings being sort of too high. It was a detailed planning application, of course, which this is not. But in terms of the site being allocated in the local plan, because obviously I've got to go away, consider the application against the local plan as part of the development plan, and obviously the material considerations, and I've got to sort of decide what weight to give to such a policy. But because you were also sort of commenting on issues on landscaping, character, appearance, loss of farmland, some of which would seem, to sort of already have been sort of almost sort of being decided by the fact the local plan has allocated this site. What sort of, how would you sort of balance those things? Because as I say, several things that you've mentioned, not all, but several things that we've mentioned presumably would have been considered in the actual allocation in 2000 when the local plan was adopted.
I have learnt so much more about the site over the last year or so. The fact that it's such a hillside, and I expect you've walked it already, it is a hilly area. There's the flooding situation. So I find it difficult to comment, to be honest, because I suppose personally, I regret that I wasn't so aware of these issues before.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. And one final question: the document that you submitted, I think it was yesterday or maybe on Friday, it was in relation to what you talked about for the global warming. There was a diagram you submitted which showed how far. So where is that document from? Can you give a sort of annotation as to where it is taken from? Because I'm not sure it says on the.
I thought it did, but I'll look that up.
If that could be checked.
Yeah, sure.
One of several things that I was looking at yesterday. If it does, then I apologise. Obviously, I'm grappling with quite a lot of information, quite a few things coming at the last minute. But
yeah, I'm aware you need references.
If not, because it's one of the questions that I think might come up. Well, I think that probably something that does need to be addressed when we come to the discussion later on about drainage. So it would just be useful in that respect.
Okay, I'll send that through.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, have you got any questions you would like to ask of Councillor Farrance?
No, I don't, thank you, sir. Just to reassure you, sir, in relation to your question, there is, as you said, in Schedule 6 of the 106 agreement, provision for the payment of health centre contributions to the council.
Yeah, 388,000.
Okay. And I think that will be a question. I think in a way, some of those sort of questions questions linked to that, I think will be probably best discussed during our discussion later on in the inquiry, when we actually discuss the actual 106 agreement and consider it against the relevant tests in the national policy framework, etc. So I will have some more questions, I think, of the parties at that stage.
But no other questions. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Councillor Farrance, for those submissions as well. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
Right, we've gone a little bit beyond the 1 o'clock